Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Colleges panic as surge of DEI cuts hit colleges nationwide. From inside higher ed, wary colleges scramble to meet DEI deadline. Trump's education department gave colleges 2 weeks to eliminate race-conscious programs. As the deadline approaches, questions remain about what compliance means and how far the Trump administration will go to enforce it. If you've been paying any attention to the Trump administration over the past 30 days or so, you know these are a pretty intense group of people. They really do mean it. They really do mean they will cut off the funding to any college, any university, any entity that they can that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. The clock is running out on colleges as they mull how to respond to a sweeping federal order to end all race-based policies and programs. In the face of an imminent Friday night deadline, college leaders are scrambling to determine how to navigate the February 14th Dear Colleague letter issued by the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights. That letter declares all race-based educational programs and policies are discriminatory and illegal. When they sent the letter on Valentine's Day, department officials gave institutions 2 weeks to comply or face investigations and possibly the loss of federal funding. The colleges don't care about investigations. They care about the funding. And I followed this for a while. And in every instance where funding is threatened in any kind of serious way like this might actually happen, the colleges and the universities back down because they do care about their ideology. They care a lot about their ideology. They're out there to promote their new religion of DEI. But when it comes to money, no, that they will not risk. Money is ultimately what these colleges and universities are all about, how it affects them personally. For many colleges, the challenge is figuring out how to avoid drawing unwanted government attention without abandoning key services for underrepresented students and staff. And you could do that. The issue would just be this. Just give everyone the same opportunity. And if they really need help, they can get help. You don't have to treat people like they're not capable of functioning in society just because they have a certain skin color, or they're a certain race, or they came from a certain country. Institutions won't lose funding overnight. The investigative process is notoriously lengthy, and the Education Department has never revoked a college's federal funding over civil rights concerns. Although I'm sure you realize this would be that first time. The Office of Civil Rights may also be rendered impotent, at least temporarily, if a judge decides to halt enforcement while considering a lawsuit filed on Tuesday challenging the letter. There are all kinds of federal judges that will agree to anything to interfere with the administration's policies. Ultimately, the administration will get through 90 to 95% of what they're trying to do, especially in this case. But college leaders are anxious about the threat of federal funding cuts, which would be catastrophic for the majority of post-secondary institutions. Ray Lee, who previously worked as an attorney at the Office for Civil Rights, said he expects the office to launch investigations shortly and that many colleges will buckle under the pressure, shedding practices that foster campus diversity and belonging. Because the diversity, the inclusion, the ideology, the indulgence of promoting their personal political agendas compares not at all to them not making as much money as they would like to make, or to have to cut salaries, or to not have the pensions that they want to have. When it comes to money, they will make any change to conform to make sure they get that money. For now, colleges seem to be taking a slow and cautious approach, removing language about race and DEI buzzwords from the names of programs and launching internal policy reviews. University of Nebraska President Jeffrey Gould said system campuses are in the midst of a comprehensive review of programs and policies, but no changes have yet been made. 2 weeks is an impossibly short amount of time to make changes in anything, much less a college or university program. The idea of this letter from the Trump Education Department was to put people on notice, hey, cut it out, start cutting it out immediately, and figure out how to do that inside your own organizations. And they're doing that now. The Nebraska Board of Regents discussed possible tweaks to its bylaws at a recent board meeting, like removing references to cultural diversity and revising language on equal opportunity in employment, but no final decisions were yet made. Gould said that as the review process continues, he doesn't expect to turn up anything that looks or feels like discrimination as the letter describes. But it's possible, quote, we will turn up some things that require some language changes or possibly some changes in titles, changes in offices that could be misinterpreted by the Department of Education just because of the use of specific terminology. He added that Nebraska banned affirmative action in 2008, and the state's second attempt at an anti-DEI bill is pending in the legislature, so, quote, we've been changing websites and titles for years. That's why I believe that there's nothing substantive that we really have to change at this time. The University of Montana undertook a similar compliance review that tasked senior administrators with assessing whether their departments had any policies or practices at odds with the Dear Colleague letter. Quote, we made the decision to be as thorough as possible, said Dave Kuntz, the university's director of strategic communications. The review, however, led to very minimal changes and really no changes at a programmatic or operational level. University leaders overall concluded that the institution was already in compliance, though some programs like the Women's Leadership Initiative chose to tweak their web pages to clarify that they don't bar anyone who wants to participate. Many institutions are responding by scrubbing their websites of words like diversity and inclusion. The University of Cincinnati, Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Pittsburgh, the University of Alaska System, and many more all did so after the Dear Colleague letter. Some colleges had already begun revising their digital presence in response to Trump's executive order on DEI in January. The University of Colorado removed all references to a former DEI office and replaced them with a website for a new Office of Collaboration. The University of Pennsylvania scrubbed the websites for all 16 undergraduate and graduate schools of DEI keywords and removed references to diversity and affirmative action from its non-discrimination policies. Sean Harper, a professor of education, business, and public policy at the University of Southern California, said he's been disappointed that the higher ed leaders are heavily revising their institution's online presences in the hopes that it will appease the OCR so that they don't get investigations, a project he believes will prove futile. In the Dear Colleague letter, Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Craig Traynor specifically warned against using proxies for race and promised to investigate race-neutral programs that discriminate in less direct but equally insidious ways. Quote, scrubbing websites, launching reviews, these are the easy things to do while colleges are in a wait-and-see mode to find out if that will take the target off their back, said Harper. He went on to say, I think it's both weak and reckless. When the Trump people come knocking at their door, and they will, and they're going to knock hard, they're going to want to see what actions they took after they got the Dear Colleague letter, which was the Trump people putting them on notice, we're not going to do discrimination in colleges and universities anymore. It's not legal. It never was legal. There's no excuse for it. It needs to stop immediately. If they can show that they immediately took action, even if it wasn't enough action, just they could point to something, at least they weren't ignoring the Department of Education, who's literally giving them millions of dollars in each of these institutions in many cases. If they can show they at least responded and didn't disrespect the Department of Education who's handing them this cash, that puts them in a much better situation. The people that get targeted are the troublemakers. If they want to make themselves out to be a troublemaker, then they can be made into an example. And if you're going to be anything in life, you don't want to be an example of somebody getting straightened out in public so that everyone else can see how bad it is to resist the authority. Some institutions have gone a step further. Colorado State University issued a statement in which leaders simultaneously maintain that its policies are already race neutral and promise to do more to comply with the new federal directives. Quote, the new administration's interpretation of law marks a change, the statement reads. Given the university's reliance on federal funding, it's necessary to take additional steps. Now there's somebody that does not need an attitude adjustment. And one day before the deadline, Ohio State University President Ted Carter announced the institution would shutter 2 DEI offices and eliminate more than a dozen staff positions, some of the most dramatic measures a college has taken during the new Trump administration. In a particularly telling move, OSU's Office of Institutional Equity will be renamed the Office of Civil Rights Compliance to more accurately reflect its work. Now that's a great attitude. That's exactly the right kind of example. And you know what? Let's make an example of their good behavior and give them some extra funding. For a glimpse of how anti-DEI compliance battles might play out between institutions and policymakers, consider the red states that have passed laws mandating similar cuts to race-conscious programs. In Texas and Florida, public colleges reacted to impending or newly signed anti-DEI laws by changing the names of university offices and campus resources, moving personnel to student support services, and removing DEI mentions from university materials and websites. But in both cases, lawmakers came down hard to ensure the institutions took more strident action, leading to significant layoffs, spending cuts, and policy changes. Well, we've seen the prequel to this film before in Texas, Harper said. When that Senate bill was looming, many institutions thought they were very smartly getting ahead of it by just renaming things. That proved to be a failed strategy, and I very comfortably predict that some version of that will also happen nationally. To call the Trump administration hardcore about trying to get America back on the right track would be very accurate. They're not interested in just publicity. They're interested in seeing results. And if we don't get DEI out of our country, the people at the top of this administration, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, they all understand how much permanent damage that will do to the country and the American way. It's all going out. In some states, the review and revamp strategy for avoiding DEI crackdowns appeared to work for a while. The University of Arkansas eliminated its DEI office in June 2023, in part to preempt a bill that state lawmakers were considering to force spending cuts. And last year, the University of North Carolina System Board of Trustees passed an anti-DEI resolution just as legislation was gaining steam to mandate enforcement from the state. That legislation was never brought to a full vote because it wasn't necessary. But circumstances have changed as the Trump administration launches direct attacks on DEI. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed a law earlier this month that will prohibit affirmative action and preferential treatment in state-supported institutions, including public colleges like the University of Arkansas. Even in Texas, where public universities underwent broad layoffs and spending cuts in response to state legislation, lawmakers have threatened to cut $400 million in higher education funding unless colleges do more to comply. Quote, if they don't kick DEI out of their schools, they're going to get a lot less, according to Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who said this at a policy forum last week. Legal experts say it's unclear what will happen after the OCR's deadline passes. The Dear Colleague letter promised more detailed guidance, but none has materialized. And if I was running this game out of the Department of Education, that's exactly what I would have done. I would have waited to see what the response was to the letter. That will tell you how severe the guidance needs to be, the instructions from the Department of Education to tell the colleges and universities what the standards are going to be. Now, they helpfully have a few people that have made public statements at colleges saying, oh, we're complying this way. We've decided to do this. We've done that. Now they can spotlight those responses in follow-up guidance and say, look, these are the kind of things that your colleagues have already done. And at a minimum, within the next 30 days, these are the things that you can do. If they can do it, you can do it. But we're all kind of in agreement that the letter is really confusing and overbroad, and the timeline is really dangerous, said Andrea Stagg, Director of Consulting Services at Grand River Solutions, a company that works with colleges on legal compliance issues. She noted that many undersourced colleagues don't have an in-house legal team to assess their risk by the deadline. But what actually happens after tomorrow? How fast will it be, she said. I don't know. Just comply. It's fine to say, I want more time to respond so I can plan a legal strategy to fight with you. But that is not something that when you're in a fight with someone, they're going to say, look, I'll give you all the time in the world. Do whatever it is you want. No, you have to have your own resources. You protect yourself. If you can't protect yourself, just comply with the request. It's that simple. Typically, the Office for Civil Rights opens investigations based on complaints from students, families, or legal advocates, but it can also launch its own direct investigations. Most cases end with a voluntary resolution in which the institution agrees to make certain changes, but unresolved cases can be referred to the U.S. Department of Justice for litigation. Lee believes the OCR will likely receive complaints from anti-DEI groups as well as open some direct investigations into higher ed institutions with race-based scholarships, which is completely illegal, affinity group graduation ceremonies, which has been deemed to be inappropriate, or other practices called out by the letter, starting next week. Lee also pointed out that the current OCR has already launched some direct investigations into universities related to Title IX. But that doesn't mean the day after the Dear Colleagues deadline, quote, schools are just going to lose all their federal funding, assuming normal procedures are followed, he said. Such investigations can take months, even years. If you're familiar with what the administration has been doing recently, they don't sit around waiting months and years to get results. They move very quickly. And funding cuts could happen very suddenly. An investigation reaching the point of litigation is also, quote, an incredibly rare step that under most administrations pretty much never happens, Lee said. And the Department of Education taking away federal funding over an OCR investigation would be completely unprecedented. Quote, but also rare things are happening right now, Lee conceded. Yep, they are. Stagg said it's hard to tell to what extent normal processes will be followed, or how much the Department of Government Efficiency's reductions to the federal workforce could affect investigations. Quote, there's a real question as to who will do these investigations and how the OCR will choose institutions to focus on, she said. Is there going to be an AI tool to search college websites for certain terms the way we saw with flagging or grants? It could be that the president has a bad interaction at a meeting with a leader and then they are targeted for investigation. It's also unclear how much resistance colleges will put up. Lee believes there's a strong case to be made that some of the practices targeted in the Dear Colleague letter are perfectly legal. Higher ed institutions under investigation could refuse to make changes and go head-to-head with the Department of Justice. But they'd be signing up for an onerous, likely expensive process that puts their funding in jeopardy. And then Lee said this, quote, the question is anyone willing to litigate it? Because why would you even bother fighting with the Department of Education when you're so dependent on their funding? Just follow the law and cut out the nonsense. Even if the Dear Colleague letter is rescinded, Lee said the Office for Civil Rights has clearly signaled its plans for the next 4 years. And he believes higher ed institutions will continue working to rid themselves of anything that could attract scrutiny. But I think there's going to be an overcorrection, he said. It's going to lead to some perfectly legal programs that support fostering racially inclusive communities on campus being taken away. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.